history is not written by the kind, it is written by the controlled. If you look closely at the darkest chapters of human history, you will see something most people refuse to acknowledge. Empires were not built by good intentions. Cities were burned to the ground. Brothers poisoned brothers. Kings ordered thousands of men to march into death without hesitation. Entire civilizations rose and collapsed under the will of a few individuals who understood one brutal truth. Power does not belong to the strongest man, nor the most intelligent. It belongs to the man who has conquered himself. Niccolò Machiavelli saw this clearly while the rest of the world hid behind illusions of morality. While philosophers spoke about virtue, justice, and ideal rulers, Machiavelli studied reality. He watched how rulers truly behaved when power was on the line. He observed betrayal, manipulation, silent calculations, and ruthless decisions made behind palace walls. And beneath all that chaos, he discovered something deeply unsettling. The most dangerous men in history were not the loudest, the angriest, or the most aggressive. They were the most disciplined. While ordinary men were ruled by anger, pride, fear, and impulse, these men ruled themselves first. That is why they ruled everything else. Understand something that history quietly whispers but society refuses to teach. Human history is not a story of fairness or goodness. It is a story of control. Control over armies, control over perception, control over fear, but above all else, control over the self. Look at the ruins of fallen kings and failed leaders. Most of them were not destroyed by enemies alone. They were destroyed by their own minds. A moment of hesitation, a surge of uncontrolled anger, a desire for comfort, a fear of losing approval. That is all it takes for power to slip through a man's fingers. The world rarely destroys weak men. Weak men destroy themselves. They sabotage their own discipline. They surrender to distraction. They chase pleasure instead of mastery. They allow emotions to dictate their decisions, and then they wonder why their lives remain small. Machiavelli would look at this and see the pattern instantly, because he understood something brutally simple. The first kingdom a man must conquer is his own mind. Until you control your impulses, you cannot control your future. Until you command your thoughts, you cannot command your life. Until you discipline your emotions, you will always be manipulated by those who have already mastered theirs. This is why most people never become powerful. They chase external victories while losing the internal war. They try to dominate the world while remaining slaves to their own weaknesses. But a man who conquers himself becomes something rare, something dangerous. His emotions no longer control him. His fears no longer slow him down. His discipline becomes sharper than any weapon. And once a man reaches that state, the world begins to move differently around him. Obstacles become strategies. Chaos becomes opportunity. Limits become illusions. This is the path Machiavelli observed in the rulers who shaped history. Not saints, not heroes, but men who mastered themselves so completely that the world eventually bent to their will. If you truly want to achieve anything, if you want to rise above the ordinary masses, if you want to become untouchable in a world ruled by chaos, then you must begin where every real conqueror began, inside your own mind. And if you are ready to walk that path, comment this below. My mind is my kingdom. Number 1. The forbidden truth about human nature. There is a truth about human nature that most people will spend their entire lives avoiding. It is not taught in schools, it is not celebrated in society, and it is certainly not comfortable to face. Yet Machiavelli built his understanding of power on this exact realization. Beneath the surface of civilization, beneath the polite smiles and social rules, human nature is not noble, it is not pure, it is not guided by virtue. At its core, human nature is driven by self-interest, fear, desire, and survival. Most people do not want to admit this, because admitting it would shatter the comforting illusion that the world is fair and that people always act from goodness. But history has never supported that illusion. History has only confirmed what Machiavelli understood centuries ago. People are predictable in their weakness. When pressure rises, when survival is threatened, when power or comfort is at stake, people reveal their true nature. Loyalty dissolves, principles bend, promises are forgotten. A man who claims to be moral will abandon his morals the moment his safety, status, or reputation is in danger. A friend who swore loyalty can become distant when your success threatens their place in the hierarchy. A crowd that praises you today can turn against you tomorrow if fear or envy enters the room. This is not cruelty. This is not pessimism. This is simply the machinery of human nature operating exactly as it always has. Machiavelli did not condemn this reality. He studied it. He understood that a man who ignores human nature becomes its victim, but a man who accepts it becomes its master. Most people walk through life believing others will act according to ideals. They expect fairness, honesty, gratitude, and loyalty. And because they expect these things blindly, they are constantly surprised when reality proves otherwise. Their trust becomes their weakness. Their naivety becomes the doorway through which manipulation enters their lives. But the man who understands the darker structure of human nature stops being surprised. He anticipates betrayal. He expects self-interest. He recognizes that fear is often stronger than loyalty and that desire is often stronger than principle. Once you see this clearly, something inside you changes. You stop chasing approval. You stop depending on the emotional validation of others. You stop believing that success requires everyone to like you. Instead, you begin to understand the real mechanics of influence and control. Because when you know what drives people, you can predict their behavior long before they realize it themselves. Fear moves people. Desire moves people. Status moves people. Security moves people. These forces have shaped every empire, every political decision, every rise and fall of leaders throughout history. The man who conquers himself begins by observing these forces without mercy. When fear appears, he studies it instead of obeying it. When desire distracts him, he controls it instead of surrendering to it. When emotion clouds his judgment, he steps back and regains command of his mind. This is not suppression. This is discipline, and discipline is the invisible armor of powerful men. Machiavelli believed that rulers who failed to understand human nature would always lose power eventually. They would trust the wrong people, react emotionally, or underestimate the motivations of others. But rulers who accepted the darker reality of human behavior could navigate the world with precision. They would not be shocked by betrayal because they already expected it. They would not panic under pressure because they understood that fear is simply another tool that moves people. They would not waste energy seeking universal approval because they knew that power rarely comes from being liked. It comes from being respected, understood, and strategically unpredictable. And the same principle applies to your own life. If you want to achieve anything significant, you must first stop lying to yourself about human nature. Stop expecting the world to reward good intentions alone. Stop believing that discipline can be replaced by motivation or that success comes from waiting for the perfect emotional state. The world is far colder than that, and only those who accept its coldness develop the clarity required to navigate it. When you accept this truth, something powerful happens. You stop seeing yourself as a victim of circumstances. Instead, you begin to see the patterns that control human behavior everywhere around you. Conversations reveal hidden motives. Decisions reveal hidden fears. Social dynamics reveal the silent competition for status and influence that shapes nearly every interaction. What once felt chaotic suddenly becomes predictable. But the most important shift happens within you. The moment you recognize the darker machinery of human nature inside your own mind, you gain the ability to control it. You stop reacting automatically. You begin choosing deliberately. And that is the moment self-conquest truly begins. If you understand this truth, prove it to yourself right now. Comment below, "I see human nature clearly." Because in the next part, we will step deeper into the battlefield of the mind and expose the silent enemy that quietly sabotages most people before they ever achieve anything at all. And once you recognize that enemy, you will understand why conquering yourself is the most ruthless war a man will ever fight. Number 2. The silent tyrant living inside your mind. There is a tyrant living inside your mind, and most people obey it without ever realizing it exists. It does not wear a crown. It does not shout commands. It does not announce its presence like an obvious enemy. Instead, it whispers, quietly, persistently, patiently, and those whispers shape the lives of millions of people who believe they are making their own decisions. Machiavelli understood that the greatest obstacle to power is rarely an external enemy. It is the hidden ruler within a man's own mind, the silent tyrant called weakness. Weakness does not appear as something dramatic or obvious. It rarely looks like failure at first. It disguises itself as comfort, caution, patience, or emotional reasoning. It convinces you that rest is necessary when discipline is required. It persuades you that waiting is wisdom when action is necessary. It convinces you that your fear is logic and that your hesitation is intelligence. And because the voice of weakness sounds so reasonable, most people never question it. They obey it as if it were their own thoughts. This is the most dangerous form of control that exists. A man can rebel against a visible enemy. He can resist oppression from the outside. But when the tyrant lives inside his own mind, resistance becomes far more difficult. Because the enemy speaks with his voice, it uses his fears, it hides behind his justifications, it manipulates his emotions, and slowly, over time, it builds a prison made entirely from the man's own thinking. Machiavelli would recognize this pattern immediately. He observed rulers who lost entire kingdoms because they hesitated when decisiveness was required. He studied leaders who allowed emotion to override strategy, and he saw how internal weakness could destroy power faster than any external enemy ever could. A ruler who cannot control his own mind becomes predictable, and a predictable man becomes easy to defeat. The same principle governs your life. If fear can influence your decisions, you can be manipulated. If comfort controls your discipline, you can be contained. If doubt dictates your actions, you can be neutralized before you even begin. This is why conquering the world without conquering yourself is impossible. The tyrant within will sabotage every attempt at power long before an external enemy ever has the chance. The most dangerous thing about this internal tyrant is how subtle it is. It rarely appears as obvious cowardice. Instead, it appears as endless thinking, endless preparation, endless planning. People convince themselves they are being strategic when in reality they are simply avoiding action. They call it patience, they call it caution. But underneath those polished words is often nothing more than fear wearing a disguise. And fear is the favorite weapon of the tyrant within. Fear of failure. Fear of embarrassment, fear of rejection, fear of being judged by others. These fears quietly reshape a man's behavior until he begins living within invisible boundaries he never consciously chose. He stops taking risks. He avoids uncomfortable growth. He chooses security over power. And slowly, his life becomes smaller and smaller. Not because the world forced it upon him, but because the tyrant within convinced him to accept it. But here is the brutal truth that Machiavelli understood. The internal tyrant only survives because you allow it to. It has no real authority unless you obey it. Its power comes entirely from your willingness to listen. Every time you obey the voice of hesitation, you strengthen its rule. Every time you choose comfort over discipline, you reinforce its control. Every time you silence your ambition to avoid discomfort, you hand the tyrant another victory. Self-conquest begins the moment you recognize this enemy clearly, the moment you hear that quiet voice of hesitation and realize it is not wisdom, it is weakness protecting itself. The moment you understand that most of the limitations you feel are not imposed by the world, but by the internal ruler that has quietly governed your choices for years. The men who become powerful are not the men who never feel fear or hesitation. They are the men who hear the tyrant's voice and ignore it anyway. They act while others debate. They move while others hesitate. They discipline themselves while others negotiate with comfort. And over time, something remarkable happens. The tyrant weakens, its voice grows quieter, its influence fades, because a tyrant who is no longer obeyed cannot rule for long. This is the beginning of true self-conquest, not the elimination of fear, doubt, or discomfort, but the refusal to let those forces control your behavior. A man who reaches this stage becomes increasingly dangerous to mediocrity, because once the internal tyrant loses power, very little in the external world can stop him. If you recognize this enemy inside yourself, prove that you are ready to confront it. Comment below, "I silence the tyrant within," because in the next part we will uncover the ruthless discipline that powerful men use to permanently overthrow this internal ruler and replace weakness with absolute control over their own minds. Number 3. The ritual of ruthless discipline. There is a reason most men never escape mediocrity, and it has nothing to do with intelligence, talent, or opportunity. The true barrier is far more humiliating than that. Most men simply refuse to become disciplined enough to control themselves. They flirt with discipline when it feels convenient. They admire it from a distance. They promise themselves they will develop it someday. But when discipline demands discomfort, sacrifice, and cold consistency, they retreat back into the warm prison of their habits. Machiavelli observed this pattern in rulers and common men alike. Power did not belong to those who wished for it. It belonged to those who were disciplined enough to shape their own behavior without mercy. Discipline is not motivation. Motivation is fragile. It appears when emotions are high and disappears the moment discomfort enters the room. Discipline is something colder, something darker. It is the decision to act regardless of how you feel. It is the ability to impose order on your own mind when every instinct inside you begs for relief. The disciplined man does not negotiate with his emotions, he commands them. And that command begins with a ritual most people will never accept. The ritual of doing what must be done even when every part of you resists it. This is the moment where the internal tyrant is truly challenged, because discipline is the weapon that threatens its rule. The tyrant thrives on comfort, distraction, and emotional reasoning. Discipline destroys all three. It replaces comfort with structure. It replaces distraction with focus. It replaces emotional impulses with deliberate action. And once a man adopts discipline as a daily ritual, the tyrant within begins to starve. Machiavelli believed that rulers who controlled themselves with ruthless consistency became nearly impossible to manipulate. Their enemies could not predict their reactions because their emotions were no longer guiding their behavior. Their decisions came from calculated reasoning rather than impulse. That is the hidden power of discipline. It removes chaos from your mind and replaces it with command. Most people misunderstand discipline because they see it as punishment. They imagine it as endless restriction, endless denial, endless effort. But in reality, discipline is liberation. It frees a man from the random impulses that dominate ordinary lives. Without discipline, your day is controlled by mood, convenience, and distraction. With discipline, your day becomes structured by intention. Your actions follow strategy instead of emotion. Your energy is directed toward results instead of scattered across meaningless habits. Look at the lives of men who fail to achieve anything meaningful. Their days are ruled by impulse. They wake when they feel like it. They work only when motivation appears. They stop when discomfort begins. Their minds constantly search for the easiest path available. This pattern feels natural because the human brain evolved to avoid effort whenever possible. But the same instinct that once helped humans survive now traps modern men in cycles of weakness. The disciplined man rejects this instinct completely. He understands that comfort is not a reward, but a trap. He trains himself to act before he feels ready. He trains himself to continue when boredom appears. He trains himself to finish what he begins, even when the excitement disappears. Over time, these actions reshape his identity. Discipline stops feeling like effort and begins feeling like control. But the ritual of ruthless discipline requires something even darker: indifference to emotional resistance. Most people wait for the right emotional state before taking action. They want to feel inspired, energized, confident. The disciplined man does not wait for these conditions. He moves regardless of what his emotions say. If he feels tired, he acts. If he feels uncertain, he acts. If he feels uncomfortable, he acts. His behavior is no longer dependent on his feelings. It is dependent on his decisions. This is where true power begins to form, because once a man detaches his actions from his emotions, he becomes extremely difficult to stop. Emotional barriers lose their ability to control him. Fear becomes background noise. Doubt becomes irrelevant. Discomfort becomes temporary. The disciplined man walks through obstacles that paralyze everyone else because he no longer requires emotional permission to move. Machiavelli saw this quality in the rulers who shaped history. They were not necessarily the most intelligent or the most talented, but they were relentless. Their discipline allowed them to endure long struggles without losing focus. They could plan patiently while others lost interest. They could continue executing their strategy long after their enemies became exhausted. That relentless consistency is what allowed them to accumulate power over time. But discipline alone is not enough to achieve true self-conquest, because even disciplined men can still be manipulated if they crave something dangerous: approval. The next enemy is more subtle than weakness and more seductive than comfort. It is the hunger for validation from others, and this hunger has quietly enslaved millions of men who could have otherwise become powerful. Before we move forward, prove to yourself that you understand the ritual of ruthless discipline. Comment below, "Discipline is my weapon," because in the next section, we will confront the psychological chain that keeps most people obedient to the opinions of others, and why breaking that chain is one of the most brutal transformations a man can experience. Number 4. The invisible chain of approval. There is a chain around the mind of nearly every man walking this earth, and the tragedy is that most of them cannot even see it. It is not made of iron. It does not leave marks on the skin. It cannot be locked or broken with physical force. Yet it controls decisions, limits ambition, and quietly shapes entire lives. This chain is the hunger for approval, the need to be accepted, the silent desire to be liked, praised, validated, and protected by the opinions of others. Machiavelli understood that this hunger is one of the most powerful forces controlling human behavior, and he also understood that any man who depends on approval will never truly possess power. This question is the birthplace of psychological slavery. Once a man begins measuring his behavior through the lens of approval, he stops acting freely. His decisions become filtered through the expectations of others. He softens his opinions to avoid criticism. He delays bold action to avoid judgment. He suppresses ambition to avoid making others uncomfortable. And slowly, piece by piece, the raw power of his individuality is traded for the fragile safety of social acceptance. Machiavelli saw this weakness clearly. Leaders who depended on the love of the people were easily manipulated by public opinion. Leaders who feared criticism became hesitant. Leaders who desperately wanted to be liked could not make ruthless decisions when those decisions were required. The ruler who seeks approval becomes a servant to the crowd. And the crowd is one of the most unpredictable forces in human history. Crowds praise today and condemn tomorrow. The same people who celebrate success will often resent it once it threatens their own position. Envy hides behind applause. Resentment hides behind politeness. And those who crave approval are constantly adjusting themselves to satisfy the shifting emotions of others. It is an exhausting, endless game that guarantees one outcome. Control over your life slowly transfers from your own mind to the expectations of the world around you. But the man who seeks power must destroy this chain completely. This does not mean becoming reckless or deliberately antagonistic. It means something far colder: emotional independence from the opinions of others. The ability to act according to your strategy even when the crowd disapproves. The ability to pursue your path even when others misunderstand it. The ability to endure criticism without letting it reshape your direction. The man who breaks the chain of approval learns to tolerate disapproval the same way he tolerates discomfort in discipline. He does not enjoy it, but he refuses to let it control him. When criticism appears, he analyzes it calmly instead of reacting emotionally. When people misunderstand his actions, he continues moving forward without explanation. When others doubt him, he treats that doubt as background noise rather than a signal to retreat. This is the psychological independence that powerful men throughout history possessed. They did not wait for universal approval before acting. They did not pause their ambitions to make everyone comfortable. They understood that influence rarely comes from pleasing everyone. It comes from pursuing a vision with such consistency that others eventually adapt to it. Machiavelli knew that the man who seeks to please everyone inevitably pleases no one, including himself. But the man who acts according to his own calculated strategy gradually earns something far more powerful than approval: respect. Respect is colder than approval. It is quieter. It does not always appear with applause, but it carries far more weight. Respect comes when people realize you cannot be easily influenced by their emotions. It comes when they see that your decisions are not easily shaken by praise or criticism. It comes when they understand that your direction is determined by your own mind, not by their reactions. And that realization changes how the world treats you. If you are ready to break this invisible chain, prove it to yourself right now. Comment below, "I do not seek approval." Because in the next part, we will expose another brutal reality Machiavelli understood about power: the strategic use of silence. And once you understand the true power of controlled silence, you will see why the most dangerous minds in history often spoke the least. Number 5. The power of the silent predator. There is a reason the most dangerous figures in history rarely revealed the full contents of their minds. It was not because they lacked thoughts or vision. It was because they understood the brutal advantage of silence. In a world where most people cannot resist speaking, explaining, defending, and revealing themselves, the man who masters silence becomes something rare and unsettling. Machiavelli understood that power is not only built through action, it is also built through what remains concealed. Words expose intention. Words reveal emotion. Words create openings for manipulation. But silence creates mystery, control, and psychological pressure. Most people speak too much because they are uncomfortable with silence. The human mind fears uncertainty, and silence amplifies that uncertainty. When a conversation becomes quiet, people feel an instinctive urge to fill the space. They begin explaining themselves. They reveal their thoughts, their concerns, their insecurities. They speak not because it is strategic, but because it relieves the tension of the unknown. And in that moment of relief, they expose information that a patient observer can use against them. The silent man understands this instinct and refuses to participate in it. He allows silence to exist without rushing to break it. He observes while others reveal themselves. He listens while others compete for attention. And the more others speak, the more the silent man learns. Every word someone speaks is a fragment of their psychology, their fears, their ambitions, their resentments, their desires. All of it leaks through language if you are patient enough to observe. Machiavelli saw this dynamic clearly in political courts and royal circles. Leaders who spoke carelessly revealed their strategies before executing them. Rivals could prepare for their moves because the intentions had already been exposed through conversation. But the leaders who spoke sparingly became unpredictable. Their enemies could not easily anticipate their next decision because the signals were never openly displayed. Silence became a shield that protected strategy. Silence also carries another kind of power: psychological dominance. When most people encounter someone who remains calm and quiet in situations where others feel pressure to speak, it creates a subtle imbalance. The quiet individual appears controlled, unshaken, observant. Meanwhile, The person who continues speaking often begins revealing more than they intended simply because the silence feels uncomfortable. In that moment, the quiet individual gains an advantage without saying a single word. Machiavelli would recognize this behavior immediately. Announcing strategy before execution invites resistance. It alerts competitors. It gives critics time to interfere. The man who quietly works toward his objectives without broadcasting them preserves the element of surprise. His progress unfolds before others fully understand what is happening. This is why many of the most effective individuals move in silence. Their plans remain hidden while they are developing them. Their ambitions remain unspoken while they are building the foundation. By the time the results become visible, the opportunity to stop them has already passed. Machiavelli understood that influence often grows stronger when words are used sparingly. A leader who speaks endlessly loses authority because his words become predictable and ordinary. But a leader who speaks rarely creates anticipation. His words are analyzed more deeply because they arrive less frequently. Silence also creates an aura of control. When people cannot easily read your thoughts, they are forced to speculate. They try to interpret your intentions. They wonder what you might be planning. That uncertainty alone can shift psychological power in your favor. While others are busy guessing, you remain focused on execution. The modern world, however, pushes people in the opposite direction. Social media encourages constant expression. Every thought is posted, every plan announced, every reaction displayed instantly. In such an environment, true silence becomes rare, and because it is rare, it becomes powerful. The man who steps away from the need to constantly reveal himself regains something valuable: control over his narrative. He decides what to reveal and when. He protects his strategies. He observes more than he speaks, and slowly, this restraint transforms how others perceive him. Silence begins to signal confidence, awareness, and control. But even silence is only one layer of self-conquest, because after you silence the internal tyrant, destroy the need for approval, and master the discipline of quiet observation, you must confront something even more difficult: the ability to detach from emotion itself. If you understand the value of silence, prove it now. Comment below. Silence is my strength. Because in the next part, we will step deeper into the psychology of power and reveal why emotional detachment is one of the most misunderstood weapons in the pursuit of true control. Number 6. The discipline of emotional ice. There is a level of control that most people will never reach. Not because it is impossible, but because it requires something deeply uncomfortable: the ability to detach from emotion when emotion is screaming for control. Human beings like to believe that their feelings are guides, that emotions provide wisdom, that passion leads to the best decisions. But Machiavelli understood something darker about the nature of power. Emotions are powerful forces, but they are also unpredictable and easily manipulated. A man who allows his emotions to govern his actions becomes a man who can be controlled by anyone capable of triggering those emotions. Look closely at how people react in moments of pressure. When anger rises, judgment collapses. When fear appears, courage disappears. When pride is wounded, reason becomes irrelevant. Entire wars have begun because leaders could not control their wounded ego. Alliances have collapsed because resentment overpowered logic. Empires have fallen because rulers allowed personal emotion to interfere with strategic thinking. This pattern is repeated throughout history with brutal consistency. Emotion clouds vision, and clouded vision destroys power. Machiavelli observed that the rulers who maintained control over their emotions could make decisions that others found impossible. They could wait patiently when others rushed impulsively. They could remain calm when others panicked. They could endure insult without immediate retaliation because they understood that revenge executed at the wrong moment weakens strategy. Emotional restraint gave them an advantage that most people never developed. This transformation is difficult because the human brain is designed to react quickly to emotional signals. Long before civilization existed, emotional responses helped humans survive danger. Fear triggered immediate escape. Anger triggered defense. Desire triggered pursuit of resources. These instincts once protected life, but in the modern world, they often sabotage it. When these ancient emotional systems collide with complex decisions about power, strategy, and long-term success, they frequently push people toward short-term reactions that damage their future. The man who masters emotional detachment learns to interrupt this ancient reaction cycle. When anger rises, he does not act immediately. He studies the anger, analyzes the situation, and decides whether responding will strengthen or weaken his position. When fear appears, he does not automatically retreat. He examines the risk carefully and separates real danger from imagined discomfort. When pride is challenged, he does not rush to defend his ego. He evaluates whether the insult truly matters in the larger strategic picture. Machiavelli understood that enemies often attempt to provoke emotional responses deliberately. Anger can be used to lure someone into reckless decisions. Fear can be used to intimidate opponents into surrendering advantages. Public insults can be used to bait rivals into humiliating reactions. Those who cannot control their emotions become predictable, and predictability is the greatest weakness in any struggle for influence. Emotional detachment also strengthens discipline. Many people abandon their goals not because they lack ability, but because their emotions fluctuate constantly. Motivation rises and falls. Excitement fades. Doubt grows louder. The emotionally detached mind does not depend on these fluctuations. It continues acting according to its strategy regardless of emotional weather. Some days will feel effortless, other days will feel exhausting, but the direction remains unchanged. This form of mental control creates a quiet resilience that most people never experience. Life becomes less chaotic because emotional storms no longer dictate behavior. Setbacks are processed rationally rather than dramatically. Success does not inflate the ego to dangerous levels. The mind remains stable, focused, and strategic, even when circumstances shift unexpectedly. Over time, people around you begin to notice this difference. While others react emotionally to pressure, you remain composed. While others argue impulsively, you observe and choose your response carefully. This composure creates an aura of control that commands attention without demanding it. Emotional restraint signals strength because it demonstrates that your mind belongs to you alone. But emotional detachment is only one layer of self-mastery, because even a disciplined, emotionally controlled man can still lose his power if he lacks one final trait: strategic patience. Many ambitions collapse not because the plan was wrong, but because the individual could not endure the long, silent process required to bring that plan to life. If you understand the value of emotional control, prove it to yourself now. Comment below. My mind is colder than my emotions. Because in the next section, we will explore the brutal strength required to master time itself, the patience that separates those who start strong from those who ultimately dominate. Number 7. The tyranny of time and the patience of predators. There is a force more powerful than strength, louder than ambition, and more ruthless than any enemy you will ever face. It governs kings and beggars alike. It destroys empires slowly and humiliates men who believe they are unstoppable. That force is time. Most people fear time because they see it as something slipping away from them, something they are constantly racing against. But Machiavelli observed a darker truth. Time does not defeat people simply by passing. People defeat themselves because they cannot endure the slow brutality of waiting, building, and striking at the right moment. Human beings are creatures of impatience. The mind craves results quickly. It wants visible progress, immediate rewards, instant validation that effort is working. When these rewards do not appear fast enough, motivation fades, discipline weakens, and doubt begins to poison the mind. This is why so many ambitions collapse before they even begin to take shape. The path to real power is rarely dramatic. It is slow, silent, and often invisible to everyone watching from the outside. Machiavelli understood that patience is not passive waiting. It is controlled endurance. It is the ability to continue executing a strategy while the world around you appears unchanged. It is the willingness to operate in silence while others grow bored, distracted, or discouraged. The impatient man reveals his intentions too early, strikes too soon, or abandons his efforts before they have time to mature. But the patient man becomes something far more dangerous: a predator who understands timing. Look at how predators in nature hunt. They do not rush blindly toward their prey. They observe, they study patterns, they wait quietly for the exact moment when action will guarantee success. The hunt may require long periods of stillness, discipline, and focus. But when the moment arrives, the strike is fast, precise, and devastating. Power works in the same way. Most people never develop this level of patience because it requires resisting one of the strongest psychological pressures in modern life: the need for constant movement and visible progress. Society celebrates speed. It glorifies instant success stories and dramatic breakthroughs. But the deeper reality is that most meaningful victories are built through long stretches of quiet preparation that no one notices. During these periods, the impatient mind begins to panic. It asks questions that slowly weaken resolve. Is this working? Am I wasting time? Should I try something else? Should I change direction? These questions create instability in the strategy. Instead of allowing time to strengthen the foundation, the impatient individual constantly disrupts their own progress by shifting plans, abandoning efforts, or chasing faster results. The patient mind behaves differently. It understands that time is not the enemy, but the weapon. Each day of disciplined action compounds the previous one. Each quiet improvement strengthens the structure that will eventually support visible success. The patient individual focuses on execution rather than immediate outcomes. Progress may be slow at first, but it becomes unstoppable because it is consistent. Machiavelli saw this principle repeatedly in political power. Rulers who rushed decisions often created chaos that weakened their authority. Leaders who attempted to seize too much too quickly provoked resistance from enemies who had time to unite against them. But leaders who understood timing could expand their influence gradually, strengthening their position before opponents even recognized what was happening. This is the darker side of patience. It allows you to build strength without attracting unnecessary attention. While others are distracted by noise, you are strengthening your position quietly. While others are chasing rapid success, you are constructing something durable. By the time your progress becomes visible, the foundation beneath it is already too strong to dismantle easily. Patience also protects you from emotional volatility. Many people abandon their goals not because they lack ability, but because they cannot tolerate the long periods where effort produces little visible reward. They begin doubting themselves. They question the path they chose. Eventually, they retreat into easier pursuits that provide faster gratification. This cycle repeats again and again, leaving them constantly starting new journeys but never completing one. The man who conquers this weakness becomes exceptionally rare. He trains his mind to operate on longer timelines. He understands that the most powerful outcomes often require years of consistent effort. Instead of seeking quick satisfaction, he develops satisfaction from the process itself. Discipline becomes the daily ritual. Progress becomes the quiet accumulation of small victories that eventually create overwhelming momentum. Time begins to work for him instead of against him. While others waste years chasing distractions, he is strengthening his position day after day. While others abandon their ambitions, he is refining his strategy. While others are exhausted by constant emotional swings, he remains steady and focused. And eventually, something remarkable happens. The compound effect of patience begins to reveal itself. What once seemed slow now appears unstoppable. Opportunities begin appearing because his preparation allows him to recognize and seize them immediately. Competitors who once seemed ahead begin to fade because their impatience caused them to burn out or collapse under pressure. The patient man understands that domination rarely happens in a single dramatic moment. It emerges gradually from countless disciplined decisions made over long periods of time. And when the moment to strike finally arrives, he moves with absolute certainty because his preparation has already guaranteed the outcome. If you are ready to master time instead of being ruled by it, prove it to yourself now. Comment below, "Time works for me," because in the next section we will confront another brutal truth Machiavelli understood about power: the necessity of becoming mentally untouchable in a world that constantly tries to weaken your resolve. Number 8. The birth of the untouchable mind. There comes a point in the journey of self-conquest where something inside a man changes permanently. It is not visible from the outside. There is no ceremony, no applause, no dramatic transformation that the world can see. But internally, a line is crossed. The fears that once controlled him lose their authority. The opinions that once shaped his behavior lose their influence. The chaos of emotions that once clouded his thinking begins to fall silent. This is the moment when the untouchable mind begins to form. Machiavelli understood that the most powerful individuals in history reached a psychological state where the external world could no longer easily destabilize them. Most people live in a constant state of psychological vulnerability. Their mood rises and falls with circumstances. A compliment can inflate their confidence. A criticism can shatter it. A setback can destroy their momentum. A moment of praise can make them careless. Their mind becomes a battlefield where external events constantly reshape their internal state. This instability makes them predictable and easy to influence. Anyone who understands their emotional triggers can manipulate their behavior. The untouchable mind operates differently. It is not built through arrogance or blind confidence. It is built through repeated exposure to struggle, failure, discipline, and reflection. Over time, the mind becomes less reactive to external pressure. Instead of absorbing every emotional shock, it begins to filter reality through a layer of calm awareness. Events still occur, challenges still appear, but the internal response remains controlled and deliberate. Machiavelli observed that rulers who developed psychological resilience could survive situations that would destroy weaker leaders. They could endure public criticism without collapsing under pressure. They could face betrayal without losing their strategic clarity. They could suffer temporary defeat without abandoning their long-term vision. Their stability made them dangerous because opponents could not easily predict how they would react under stress. The modern world attempts to weaken this kind of mental resilience. It trains people to avoid discomfort whenever possible. Convenience replaces endurance. Distraction replaces reflection. People fill every quiet moment with noise, entertainment, or stimulation. As a result, the mind rarely experiences the silence required to develop real strength. Instead of confronting challenges directly, many people escape into temporary relief. But the untouchable mind is forged in the opposite environment. It grows through solitude, discipline, and repeated confrontation with difficulty. Every time a man faces something uncomfortable and refuses to retreat, his psychological tolerance expands. What once seemed intimidating begins to feel manageable. What once caused hesitation becomes familiar territory. Over time, this process creates emotional immunity. Insults lose their ability to provoke anger. Criticism loses its ability to create insecurity. Failure loses its ability to generate despair. The mind becomes steady because it no longer depends on perfect circumstances to function. Instead, it adapts to whatever conditions appear. This stability has a profound effect on decision-making. When fear and pride no longer dominate your thinking, you can evaluate situations with greater clarity. You become less concerned with protecting your ego and more focused on protecting your strategy. Mistakes become information rather than personal attacks on your identity. Setbacks become adjustments rather than reasons to quit. Machiavelli believed that a ruler who could not control his inner reactions would eventually lose control of his external power. Emotional instability spreads into decisions, and unstable decisions create chaos. But a ruler who maintained composure under pressure could outlast opponents who relied on emotional momentum. The untouchable mind also removes the fear of judgment. Many people hesitate to pursue ambitious goals because they worry about how others will perceive them. They imagine criticism before it even occurs. They dilute their ambitions to avoid attracting negative attention. This fear acts like a silent prison, keeping people trapped inside ordinary lives. But once the mind becomes untouchable, this fear dissolves. The opinions of others lose their emotional weight. Praise becomes irrelevant. Criticism becomes background noise. The focus shifts entirely toward execution and growth. Actions are guided by internal standards rather than external approval. This psychological independence is what allows powerful individuals to pursue paths that others consider extreme or unrealistic. While the majority hesitates, the untouchable mind continues moving forward without needing reassurance. Its confidence does not come from applause, but from the quiet knowledge that it can endure whatever consequences arise. And that endurance is what ultimately separates the rare few from the ordinary many. Because when the mind becomes untouchable, the world loses its ability to control your behavior through fear, pressure, or approval. Your direction becomes self-determined. Your discipline becomes internal. Your strategy becomes protected from emotional disruption. This is the state where real power begins to crystallize, not loud power, not theatrical dominance, but quiet, controlled authority over your own mind and actions. From this position, very few obstacles remain capable of stopping you. If you are ready to develop this level of control, prove it now. Comment below, "My mind is untouchable," because in the next part, we will move into the final stage of this transformation, the moment where self-conquest turns into absolute command over your life, your direction, and your destiny. Number 9, the throne of self-dominion. There is a moment in a man's evolution that very few will ever reach. It is the moment when he no longer feels like a participant in his own life, but the ruler of it. No longer dragged by impulse, no longer manipulated by fear, no longer slowed by hesitation or softened by the need for approval. This is the stage Machiavelli understood better than most philosophers. The moment when self-conquest becomes self-dominion. The moment when the mind stops negotiating with weakness and begins issuing commands. Most people never arrive here because they never fully kill the illusion that they are victims of circumstance. They blame time, luck, other people, their past, their environment. These explanations feel comforting because they shift responsibility away from the self. But Machiavelli saw the brutal flaw in this thinking. A man who believes the world controls him will always remain controlled by it. Only the man who accepts absolute responsibility for his direction can ever achieve true authority over his life. Self-dominion begins when excuses die. Not weakened, not reduced, destroyed completely. The moment you stop allowing explanations for your own inaction, something cold and powerful replaces them. Accountability. The realization that every moment you waste, every discipline you abandon, every opportunity you ignore is not the fault of the world. It is the decision of your own mind. This truth is uncomfortable, almost brutal in its clarity, which is why most people avoid it. But the rare man who accepts it gains something extraordinary: control. Because if your life is your responsibility, then it is also your territory, and territory can be conquered. Machiavelli believed that rulers who wanted to maintain power had to command their territory with constant awareness and vigilance. A kingdom left unattended quickly falls into chaos. Rival forces emerge. Order dissolves. Control weakens. The same rule applies to the mind. If you do not govern it deliberately, impulses will take control. Distractions will multiply. Weakness will reorganize itself quietly until it dominates your behavior again. Self-dominion requires permanent vigilance. It means waking up every day with the understanding that your mind is territory you must command. Your habits are soldiers that either protect your kingdom or betray it. Your discipline is the law that keeps order intact. The moment you abandon this vigilance, the forces of weakness begin creeping back into power. But there is something else that emerges at this stage: clarity. When a man fully conquers himself, the noise of indecision disappears. He no longer wastes energy debating whether he should act. He no longer searches endlessly for motivation. His path becomes simpler because his mind has stopped arguing with itself. Decisions are made quickly because the authority within him is unquestioned. This clarity creates momentum. and momentum creates power. The self-dominated man becomes frighteningly consistent. While others start and stop, he continues. While others hesitate, he executes. While others collapse under emotional pressure, he adapts and moves forward. This consistency compounds over time until the difference between him and the average person becomes impossible to ignore. From the outside, it appears as if he possesses extraordinary willpower, but the truth is colder than that. He simply removed the internal resistance that weakens most people. The average mind is divided. One part wants progress while another part craves comfort. One part wants ambition while another part fears judgment. These internal conflicts drain energy and create paralysis. The self-dominated mind has resolved this conflict. There is only direction. Machiavelli believed that rulers who mastered themselves possessed the greatest advantage of all, independence from chaos. While others were tossed around by circumstances, the self-controlled ruler could shape events through deliberate action. The same principle applies to any individual who achieves true self-dominion. Life will still present obstacles. Enemies will still appear. Failure will still occur occasionally. But none of these things have the same power they once had. Because the most dangerous battlefield, the mind itself, is no longer in rebellion. It is under command. And once a man reaches this stage, something changes in how the world responds to him. People sense stability. They sense certainty. They sense that his actions come from a place deeper than temporary emotion. This quiet authority attracts opportunities and influence without the need for loud displays of power. But there is one final step that separates those who merely control themselves from those who truly achieve anything they decide. Action. Because self-conquest without execution is still only potential. And Machiavelli respected one type of individual above all others, the one who transforms internal power into external impact. If you have reached this point in the journey, prove it to yourself now. Comment below, I rule my mind. Because in the final part, we will bring everything together and reveal the ultimate principle of Machiavellian self-conquest, the mindset that allows a man to achieve almost anything he decides, while the rest of the world continues fighting battles they never even understand. Number 10. The final law. Become the architect of your fate. There is a final truth that separates those who merely understand power from those who actually wield it. It is not a secret hidden in ancient books, nor a technique reserved for kings or conquerors. It is something colder and far more demanding. The ultimate law of self-conquest is this: once you control your mind, there is no one left to blame and nothing left to wait for. The world stops being an excuse and becomes raw material. From that moment forward, your life becomes a structure you must build deliberately, stone by stone, decision by decision, day after day. Machiavelli understood this with ruthless clarity. Men who achieve extraordinary outcomes are not lucky, blessed, or chosen by fate. They become the architects of their own destiny because they refuse to surrender authorship of their lives to anyone else. The architect of fate rejects this illusion entirely. He understands that control begins with a brutal acceptance. Every decision matters. Every hour wasted matters. Every habit repeated matters. The architecture of your future is quietly shaped by the smallest behaviors you repeat every day. This realization is both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it removes every comfortable excuse. Liberating because it places the tools of change directly in your hands. Machiavelli studied leaders who shaped history, and he noticed a pattern that ordinary observers rarely see. These individuals did not simply react to events as they occurred. They prepared themselves in advance so that when opportunity appeared, they were ready to seize it instantly. Their discipline created readiness. Their patience created timing. Their emotional control prevented panic. When the moment arrived, they did not hesitate because the internal preparation had already been completed. The average person waits for certainty before acting. They want reassurance that their effort will succeed. They want guarantees that risk will be rewarded. But certainty rarely appears in the real world. Waiting for it only creates paralysis.